People look back to Cataclysm and point fingers. They herald it as the beginning of the end. It was, after all, World of Warcraft's first expansion to consistently drop subscribers, and the destruction of so much of the game that had grown between 2004 and 2010. It fundamentally changed so many aspects of the world, class design, and overall gameplay, and ultimately alienated some of World of Warcraft's most long-standing players from their favourite virtual world. It was, however, very ambitious by Blizzard, I can certainly say that much. To remake the entire old world as well as delivering an expansion on top of that, I can't think of another expansion that has taken on the same amount of content delivery in a single go. It's just unfortunate then that it didn't work out. Or did it? Whilst everyone is of course free to criticise expansions however they wish, a lot of the grief Cataclysm gets just seems, well, kind of unjustified really. And that is what I'm going to be talking about today. It's also worth a mention that I think now, having replayed the first 3 versions of WoW through fully, well, there's a bit of Wrath of the Lich King left, but you know what I mean. I know that I now have a different perspective on some of the key issues that people attribute to cata to this day. So let's get into it and talk about why I feel Cataclysm really doesn't deserve the negative reputation that it gets. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal kit delivery service that sends you all the ingredients you need to make delicious home-cooked meals right in your own kitchen. Everyone wants to try and cut back on errands at this time of the year, so why not do it? Skip the extra grocery store trip and get tasty recipes delivered with HelloFresh. You just pick your meals, decide on the delivery date, sit back, and all your ingredients will arrive pre-portioned. You don't have to be thinking about the next mealtime. HelloFresh keeps your options interesting by offering over 45 weekly recipes and over 100 curated picks from the HelloFresh market. You can also pick and choose depending on how you want to eat. Maybe you want vegetarian or more protein. Whatever it is, you should be able to find it. What I like about these meals is not only can they put you on track for eating better in general, but you're also leveling up your real-life cooking skill. Right now, you can get a free breakfast for life with code POGWILLEFREE at HelloFresh.com, giving you 1 breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. You can check it out via the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. Many thanks to HelloFresh for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. Let's start with the talent trees. They are the building blocks that make our classes unique and our specializations, well, special. So in Cataclysm, they cut down the size of talent trees in a pretty big way. Whereas from Vanilla to Wrath, you gained 1 talent point per level at level 10 or above. Now in Cata, you got 1 point at levels 10 and 11, and then 1 point every 2 levels after that. And finally, 1 point per level between 81 and 85. All in all, this gave you a total of 41 points to spend. So whilst leveling, you were getting points to spend half as often, but when you were doing 80 to 85, you still did get 1 talent point per level. I think people forget you still do get points to spend pretty often when playing through Cataclysm content. This isn't the Mists of Pandaria system where they made it 1 talent per 15 levels, though class design was still very good in MoP despite this, but that's a discussion for another day. Also in Cataclysm, you do still have to go back to your trainer to learn new spells, and your spellbook will let you know when you need to do so. However, spell ranks have gone. You train a spell once and it just scales up with you. And since down ranking isn't a thing in Wrath anymore because lower ranks don't cost less mana, this doesn't really seem like a big deal either. The other main problem people take with the Cata talent revamp is that there is far less flexibility in what you spend where. There is no denying this. No longer can you spend points wherever you please. Once you pick a specialization at level 10, you must invest at least 31 points into that tree before you can open up the other 2 talent options. As to why they did this, well, it goes without saying this is going to be so much easier to balance on Blizzard's end when they know exactly how far you can go down each tree. But in cata, talents are way more powerful on average than they are between vanilla and wrath. Gone are nearly all do X% more damage with wide talent abilities, or those that give you a bit of extra parry. There are still a few of those in there, such as ones that give armor boosts for tanks, but there's way fewer. Now each talent is meant to feel more impactful, and though it's a more noticeable addition to your spec, if you could put points wherever, it would create some insane hybrids. And it would be interesting to see what people could come up with, but there would probably just be a handful that would dominate and be clearly better than everything else. The thing is, nowadays with flexibility, it just doesn't feel as though it matters as much. We don't get class balancing or reworks during expansions anymore, or if we do, it is quite minor, and we have a pretty good idea of how each spec will perform over an expansion's life cycle. And to top it off, nearly every good PvE spec in the entire game already uses their end of talent tree ability. I can think of 3 specializations in Wrath where you don't go to the bottom of your talent tree, those being Blood DK Tank, Arcane Mage, and the Blade Flurry Mutilate Hybrid Rogue build. Maybe there's more of them. But that's 3 actually good hybrids out of a possible 30 different talent trees in the game. And let's face it, you're not going to be subverting expectations by turning up to a raid with some homebrew spec, which is just objectively worse than other ones. Now in PvP, however, there are more arguments for the ability to do something unexpected, but I generally already hear good things about cata PvP, more so than Wrath anyway. And speaking of that, in Wrath, I'm not even sure if the diehard PvPers look forwards to facing probably the most well-known hybrid PvP build in the game, which is the Preg Pala. But let's move on to the next point. Classes start to lose their identity and start to feel very samey. So casually ignoring the fact Warrior and Bear Druid have had 3 literally copy-paste abilities since vanilla, this does start to become more true. Druids and Paladins get interrupts, for example. Core healing spells for pretty much all healers are changed into having one ability which is fast and expensive, slow and cheap, and slow and efficient. And many more classes do get access to both offensive and defensive cooldowns. Why now though? Well, if I had to guess, 10-player heroic raiding. Blizzard wanted 10-mans to be a viable alternative to 25, for them to reward the same gear, and for them to provide a similar level of challenge. Doing that with 10 players though is so much more restrictive than 25. You need to cover all the various raid buffs, you need enough interrupts, and you need classes that can cover a variety of utility and debuffs. Otherwise, the 10-man raiding scene would only cater to certain class comps. And come on, at least healers need more good raid-wide cooldowns. In Wrath, your best raid-wide cooldowns are Divine Sack and Aura Mastery, and surprise surprise, Holy Paladins are stacked like crazy because of this. And aside from that, they're also just one of the best healers in general on most fights. It's not like they're losing out on throughput because they have raid cooldowns. And I don't know, I think cooldowns are just fun to have in general. Lining everything up together and blasting on the damage meters when there's lots of ads or an execute phase is just fun. And saying all this about classes and potential changes and having more abilities, some specs do remain quite familiar, others change a lot. At the end of the day, it is an expansion, so you should expect things to be different. Next is that the old world is gone and that Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor are shattered and totally remade. So this one is a tough one because questing has always been one of my favorite bits of the game. It's what I spent the most of my time doing in vanilla, but expansions make it hard to care about the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor when we're flying off to spend about 90% if not more of our time in Outland or Northrend. Expansions also changed the vanilla questing experience too. XP between 1 and 60 got nerfed in TBC, elite zones got downgraded to normal, and in Wrath they reduced the XP needed even more, added heirlooms, and now we have the LFG as well. And in Classic now on top of the LFG, there's also Joyous Journeys, which is 50% bonus XP, and this buff is added back into the game in a run up to a new patch and sometimes afterwards as well. And this has been the case for a long time now. Expansions started treating older content as something you just need to get out of the way and get done, and with people always coming back to the game for Joyous Journeys, It seems as though more people are playing the game in that way now, and even if the old world remained the same, the speed at which you level would have you getting a bit over halfway into a zone before you start feeling over-leveled. You would start to out-level dungeons before you've prepped all the quests, and there would just be a general sense you would be skipping content to find things which match your level. Vanilla's world was designed with lots of dungeon runs or mob grinding in between going around the entire world to quest. The Burning Crusade and Wrath's questing is designed around having you do a set story in a zone and you visiting each of the quest hubs and then doing everything before moving on to the next one. And Cata took that TBC and Wrath format and put it into vanilla. And as much as the first 1 or 2 playthroughs of this system are fun, they just don't have that same replayability for me. And though the old world is very much nostalgic for me as well, changes to the game's pacing and overall class design would have had a massive effect on it as well. You can already steamroll your way through leveling in Wrath. If you really want that original classic experience, you have to go back to vanilla, not the expansions. And with Era and Hardcore doing well and a seasonal server coming up, you have that experience there if you want to go back to it, which I think is a great thing. However, as for the world changing permanently, it was fine for Cataclysm when it made sense then, but come on Blizzard, it's been over a decade now. Is that Vortex in Westfall running out of juice anytime soon? Can you finish the work on Sentinel Hill? Okay, fine, they got the roof put on the inn during Cataclysm. That only took them 6 years to do from the start of vanilla, but what's with all the scaffolding that's been left up for this long? Anyways, let's move on to the next point, because the next one was a common complaint back in the day, less so nowadays I find. But Cata was the first expansion to only have 5 additional levels added, and there was generally seen as being less content as a whole to get stuck into when the expansion came out. The reasoning why is pretty simple, I reckon. Cata to this day has to be one of the largest gameplay updates ever. Everything from starting zones at level 1 to level 60 in Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor was changed. Quests updated, new storylines added, zones remade. A lot. Some players hopped into playing new races in their starting zones, which I never hear anything bad about by the way, but for many they already had a level 80 and they wanted to see what was new. So that insane time investment into revamping the world was instantly skipped as people hopped into Hyjal or Vashir to see the new content for the first time. I know that's what I did. And when you did reach level cap, there was an offering of content not all that dissimilar with the amount we find in Wrath. However, it was just a lot more difficult and less casual friendly than pickup group content had been for a long time. At least with Classic, we know that if a phase of the game is a bit less engaging, Trial of the Crusader, we can expect it to have a shorter duration overall. Speaking of content cadence, that brings me to my next point. Dragon's Soul. It went on for too long back then, there are no arguments from me there. At least we can decide how long it will last in Classic. I don't think we need to see that raid for over a year again. Also, if we do get Cata, I'm telling you they're gonna do Mists of Pandaria as well. I did a fair bit of raiding in that expansion, and dare I say it, it was pretty good. The other main issue I hear about Dragon's Soul is the Deathwing encounter. People didn't enjoy the 2-part fight thematically, as they felt as though they never really fought Deathwing directly, which is fair enough if that's how you saw it. There was also the fact that Spine of Deathwing, the penultimate encounter of the expansion, was much more difficult than Madness, and had a lot of guilds stuck there for a long time. But looking at Wrath at the moment, so far they've been buffing content. Next Ramus was buffed by 30%, believe it or not. Ulduar was pre-nerfed, and ICC was not directly changed, but we have all the content available from day one and are severely undergeared compared to the original launch. Then again, players these days can go into raids with meta comps, tactics well prepared, all that kind of stuff. The average player is much better these days. And personally for Dragon's Soul, I'd want to see the content of the raid, as in, are the fights fun? How do the classes play? Are the gear upgrades interesting? I want to see the raid myself and judge it on those points, as I only pugged a few fights on normal back in the day, so I'll certainly give it a try before just going off of everything I've heard. Finally! You knew it was coming, didn't you? LFR. So what am I going to say about this one? They might not introduce it? What we know is there was no LFR till the last patch of Cataclysm, so the likelihood of previous raids having it, frankly, is not very high. There are positives, of course. It does allow anyone to see the raid at any time without any set schedule. But the goal of LFR was ultimately to get more people into raiding, and I don't really think it achieved that, and I've never been a fan of the system personally. The main issues for me were that it was too good not to do. The tier set bonuses in Dragon's Soul were very powerful. An LFR piece could still let you hit a 2 or 4 set threshold and be very worthwhile. It was unironically too hard. There were no determination stacks at launch and no expectation for anyone to have an idea about tactics or gearing, and people just padded their item levels to queue up. There was a lack of communication, obviously. Somebody might start typing in raid warning if you were fortunate, but otherwise there was a rotating door of anonymous players who just didn't want to wait and put the pulls in. You always got people semi-AFKing or accidentally dying to mechanics at the start of a fight. And if you didn't get your LFR out of the way on reset day, when all the I have to be here players were there, it just got worse and worse as the week went on. All in all, it was just often a frustrating experience, and if the goal's to get more people into raiding, I think there has to be a better way to do it. These days, maybe flex raiding for normal comes in one expansion early, so more casual groups aren't held down to needing exactly X amount of players for every raid, and people can have a good chance to see the content. All in all, I doubt the LFR will make a return, but I didn't think the LFD would either, so time will tell. Whatever happens moving forwards, I do think that Cataclysm gets more negativity put on it than it necessarily deserves. And it seems that in our classic timeline, though Wrath may be moving forwards into the next expansion, we still do have vanilla as a viable option through era, hardcore, or seasonal servers. So the choice where you want to play will be there. What do you reckon though? Any strong thoughts on Cataclysm? Does it deserve its reputation? Are you going to skip it, or are you looking forwards to it? Let me know below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all on the next one very soon.